Hey everyone, I'm Armor Gaming, welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Steak. This steam-powered snake is designed to stand up to apex predators. Steak lives in the water where it recharges and cools its system, but it is a fully functioning machine out of water. It can survive in battle up to 9 days. Steak is the newest and latest water legendary monster, and to me it looks like this can be a part of the Thetis family, but it's not. He's a completely different monster on his own. And before I move further into the analysis, I need to make sure that everyone understands I am doing this analysis before this monster is actually released inside of the game of Monster Legends, which means by the time he's actually released, something might be different, his stats, his skills, or something. There's a possibility that something may be changed. This is the premature analysis. With that being said, let's jump right into it. The first thing you'll notice about Steak is his amazing power. 3685 is the highest power for a water legendary monster. Previously, the monster that had the highest power was Thetis' pet with a power of 3575, so Steak completely beats him. And furthermore, in terms of every single monster in Monster Legends, Steak is tied for 3rd place. He's third only to Radar and Talos the Alien Protector. He's tied with Lucifer the Hope Freezer, they both share a power of 3685, Radar is currently still on top with a power of 3850, and Talos the Alien Protector, he has a power of 3696. And so what can I say other than Steak is incredibly impressive in terms of his power. But actually, that's not all. His life is 34,683, which is the 3rd highest life in the water category. The monster with the highest life currently in the water category is Cryoton. I mean, of course, he's like a huge mountain, and next up is Thetis' bodyguard. But now here comes along this new monster with the highest power, and he also has a pretty darn high life. And then his speed is also nothing to laugh at, 3454. In terms of the stat itself, it's the 5th highest stat. In terms of placement, he's tied for 11th place with Cabinfish and Hydrocella Icebringer. And so overall, this monster has an incredible power, a pretty darn amazing life, and a really good speed stat. And then if you thought this monster couldn't get any better, his trait is tough. It's not even hardened, it's tough. This is a trait that generals have, which means that all status effects have a 35% less accuracy to actually land. And it looks to me like more and more common monsters or non-general type monsters are getting this trait. As for books, this monster is going to be in the Mechanical book and the Evil Legions book, and as for relics, this monster can hold the Mask Relic and the Trap Relic. And as for the Mask Relic, there's quite a few different things you can play around with. If you happen to have the legendary Balthasar's Mask, then it might be a pretty good relic on this monster because he's already super strong. You're going to see his skills are also really strong, so why not just give him even more strength? But then of course you're free to play around with stamina manipulation. For example, if an enemy monster attacks you, you can drain some of their stamina. And if you're worried about survivability, you can give this monster a healing mask and then he can recover his life after he drops below 50%. And as for the Trap Relic, you pretty much have the same options. If you have Tagless Trap, you can deal damage to the enemy monsters. If you have the Oblation Trap, you can remove stamina from all of the enemy monsters. And if you have something like the Pestilence Trap, you can reduce all of the enemy's monsters' maximum HP before the battle even begins. And so without even having to look at the skill set for this monster, I think you can already tell that Steak is one of those next generation monsters that it just completely blows everyone out of the water. But with that said, let's actually talk about his skill set. Let's talk about his ultimate. Condensed Steam deals very heavy special damage to all enemies, applies Mega Freeze to all enemies. So not only is this an incredible attacker, if you get his ultimate, he can also deny, he can actually Mega Freeze everyone, and on top of that, it's dealing 60 special base damage. And this is pretty weird because normally by now I have some complaints about a monster. Maybe his trait is bad, maybe the speed or the life or the something is bad, or the special, but now with this monster, so far everything about this monster is amazing. Moving on to skills group 1, we need to talk about Forced Exhaustion, which is a must-have skill, removes all negative side effects from itself, gives 1 extra turn to itself, requires cooldown. Talk about an incredible skill in skills group 1. It costs no stamina, has a 3-turn cooldown, grants you an extra turn, and removes any negative effect you may have. The benefit of having an extra turn skill automatically is in case your monster was to get possessed, there's a chance your monster can use this skill and get rid of that possession, or not really get rid of, but just waste the possession, and then you're free to use your own attack. And then the extra benefit of having an extra turn skill is if your monster happens to be total blinded, you can use your extra turn skill to get rid of that total blind and then proceed on the next turn with your following attack. But the cool thing about Forced Exhaustion specifically is that it also removes any negative effect you may have. So now if you have blind, if you have daze, sunburn, any negative torture status effect, anything at all that's negative, you completely get rid of it and then you're free to attack. And so obviously this skill is just so darn amazing, you have to run it. The fact that it costs no stamina, I don't understand why they did that. They didn't have to do that. If this skill would have cost 30 stamina, 50 stamina even, I think it would still be worth it. But the fact that it's no stamina, that is so darn interesting. And so definitely be sure to run it. But as for the other skills in skills group 1, I don't think they're worth talking about. Increased Compression is just a damage boost with no cooldown. Hot Refrigeration is just a 0 cooldown 50% chance to bleed skill, so not worth mentioning. Forced Exhaustion though, must have skill. Moving on over to skills group 2, honestly you can pretty much run any of these skills if you want to. We have Stabilized Rotation, deals moderate special damage to one enemy, applies damage boost and increased accuracy to itself, 40 special base damage to a single enemy monster, 29 stamina, no cooldown, it's spammable, cooldowns activated, can't do anything against you, you get 2 buffs to yourself, a damage boost and an increased accuracy buff. Next up is 4-stroke Fangs, deals heavy water damage to one enemy, applies bleeding to one enemy, 50 water based damage to a single enemy monster, 25 stamina cost, no cooldown, which means it's also spammable, which means cooldowns activated also can't touch you, and you also give bleeding to the enemy monster. And then bleeding does 2 things, it'll reduce the enemy's HP by 50% for the next 3 turns, and it also reduces your damage output by 20%. Scalding Steam is next, deals moderate water damage to all enemies, applies bleeding to all enemies, requires cooldown. 35 water based AoE, 25 stamina cost, 2 turn cooldown, and it gives bleeding to all of the enemy monsters. Now I'm gonna go to skills group 3 before I come back to skills group 2. And in skills group 3 we have Revolution's Increase. Deals heavy water damage to one enemy, applies double damage to itself, requires cooldown. 50 water based damage to a single enemy monster, 24 stamina cost with a 1 turn cooldown, and it gives your monster double damage, which is essentially just a setup skill. So the next 2 skills I'm going to talk about are must-have skills in my opinion. The first of which is 2-stroke Fangs. Deals insane water damage to an enemy, applies bleeding to an enemy, requires cooldown. 75 water based damage to a single enemy monster, it only costs 25 stamina, and it only has a 1 turn cooldown, and it also gives bleeding on top of that 75 insane water damage. Incredible, this is your OTK skill. If you use this skill against an enemy monster, you're pretty much going to finish him off in one hit, especially if you can give him some sort of buff before he attacks. If you can turn transfer with a Demise, turn transfer with Sammy, guaranteed to kill the enemy monster. It is just such a powerful skill, a great skill to have for offense and for defense. The next must-have skill is Broiling Refrigeration. Deals heavy water damage to all enemies, applies bleeding to all enemies. Here we have a 50 water based AoE that only costs 24 stamina, which is incredibly low, has a 3 turn cooldown, and it gives bleeding. On top of the 50 water based heavy damage, it gives bleeding to all of the enemy monsters. How insane is that? And so that's why I'm saying Broiling Refrigeration, 2-stroke Fangs, must have skills. These 2 are incredibly powerful. Also, Force Exhaustion is a must have skill, which leaves you for that 4th and final skill pretty much whatever you want from skills group 2 or skills group 3. The reason you might want Scalding Stream even though you're already running Broiling Refrigeration is because 50 and then 35, you can do that back to back. That'll pretty much finish off the enemy monsters, and that's really more for those of you players that really like AoEs, especially if you put this monster on defense. He has 2 AoEs he could use, but I'm personally not a fan of running 2 AoEs, especially on a strong monster. Most of the time I just want to dwindle down the enemies. I take out one enemy monster, you know, the biggest threat, then I take out another enemy monster, then I take out the final monster. You know, very solemnly what I actually do an AoE to start off. Normally I just single OTK one enemy monster. So with that said, instead of doing Scalding Stream, one thing you could do is just run Revolution's Increase first, grant yourself that double damage, and then on the next turn just do Refrigeration, and that's essentially a 100 damage AoE. But again, that requires a setup. Or you could also do Rotation and then Refrigeration, in which case you only have a damage boost, so Refrigeration is more like 75, but thanks to the increased accuracy, you're guaranteed to land. And so essentially it's up to you, what kind of setup do you want to have? Do you like the double damage setup? Do you like the damage boost and increased accuracy setup? Or maybe you don't even want to worry about setup, and maybe you just want to have a powerful 0 cooldown skill that you can spam whenever you're against an opponent that does cooldowns activated. And I think it's super important to have a skill that's 0 cooldown on just about all of your monsters, because there are so many monsters now that can activate your cooldowns, and especially if you have a monster on defense, it's better that your monster does something instead of nothing. And so especially if you have a monster that just has like a 0 cooldown, 50% chance to stun, 50% chance to sunburn, you know, anything especially that reduces accuracy or immobilizes the enemy, I think it's worth it instead of just having your monster skip its turn and just recharging. So with that said, I personally wouldn't recommend Revolution's Increase. The double damage seems nice, but not a fan of the 1 turn cooldown, and also I don't really think you have to rely on setting up with this monster. If you're on a team of 3, you can have your support monster set up. So with that said, I would personally recommend Stabilized Rotation, because I love the fact that it's anti-cooldowns activated, and I love the fact that it's a special based skill. You at least want to have one special based damage skill instead of just all pure water attacks, which is why I'm not personally going to recommend 4-stroke Fangs. I'm not saying it's a bad skill, it's definitely a good skill, 50 damage and bleeding, but I just like the fact that rotation, it's special based, it's spammable, and you get that increased accuracy and damage boost, which means on the next turn, whatever skill you do, like even if you were to get hit with cooldowns activated, you're going to be able to use 2-stroke Fangs on the next turn because it has a 1 turn cooldown, meaning you're going to have the increased accuracy and the damage boost, so 2-stroke Fangs has the potential to wipe out the enemy monster. And so that's going to be my recommended skill set: Broiling Refrigeration, 2-stroke Fangs, Stabilized Rotation, and Forced Exhaustion. And as for the rune set on this monster, you want to go with your typical attacker setup, 2 strength runes and a team speed, 2 strength runes and a speed, or if you have a really high level strength rune, maybe just a strength, a team speed, and a speed. It really depends on you, what kind of opponents you're facing, what kind of team dynamic you have, so just fit the runes to your liking, to your playstyle. And as for the relics that I mentioned earlier, you have a lot to choose from. Do you want to drain stamina? Do you want to focus on health? Do you want to focus on damage output? If you want damage output and making it easier to kill the enemy, I would recommend the Pestilence Trap to reduce the enemy's max HP, and then maybe a Balthasar's Mask if you happen to have it. Or if not, forget about Balthasar's Mask and maybe give him the Healing Mask. That way it's really hard for your enemy to kill Steak, and then you can just focus on doing the AoE damage, the 75 damage. You have a lot to play with, so hopefully you guys like this monster. Hopefully he doesn't change too much from the time I'm doing this analysis, because he appears to be very, very powerful. So again, something might be changed, but as of this point, I really don't see it. So with that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. Please let me know in the comments below what skill set would you choose. What would be that 4th and final skill? Would you personally go with the skill set I chose, or would you go with the double damage? Would you go with the 0 cooldown 50 damage bleeding skill? Whatever your thought may be, please let me know in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.